I want to thank you all for joining us. Technical difficulties is part of our life as QA testers, so we're going to laugh a little bit about that when things happen. So I will restart my intro and go fast through this. So today, we're going to have a lot of special speakers, some of which I have the pleasure of working with over the past couple of years. I have the honor of opening this up. So I'm going to start by going over a presentation, talking a little bit about the history of testing and performance testing. So, talking a little bit about where we were, where we are, and kind of where things are going. So without further ado, I'm going to move over to my next slide over here. SQALogic is basically a network of like-minded quality assurance specialists and experts. So we've been in operation now since 2012, coming up on 10 years. And basically, the idea of SQALogic is something I had in my heart for a long time. I've been in the industry now for 25 years, worked with a lot of big organizations, one of which was Mercury Interactive, who dominated the space for many, many years through the Y2K and after, and worked with SAP. And after a long stint in the QA space, founded SQALogic with the objective of helping organizations do things better, get more value out of the tools that they own, and establish good practices around that. So as I mentioned, we're a network of international experts. We operate in projects around the world. And we're happy to be here as a guest speaker, opening up the presentation for LoadTestWorld. We've been using the Redline 13 technology for a lot of our mandates, and are very excited to partake in this. So let's take a look at what the new reality is. Okay, so we've all been, challenged over the last year and a half, 2 years with something that hit us fast, right? So COVID arrived, changed the way that the world operates, changed the way that customers interact with corporations and organizations, and it changes our way of interacting with our customers. So what we're seeing is, there's naturally increased traffic across the board on the channels that we use to communicate with our customers. The development of teleworking, which was there, right? Something that existed within organizations. People would telework a day or two a week sometimes, and operate in certain ways, and a certain percentages of our customers, or of our employees, that is, would be in a telework model. But the arrival of COVID forced a lot of organizations to think about telework in a different way. All of a sudden, we had all of our employees obligated to do their work remotely. And, what we saw is the world was able to turn around pretty fast in that model and adapt to it. Now, with that naturally comes increased traffic, problems around security and so forth. And there's a lot of things that force us to think about performance in a different way. And finally, as I mentioned, the communication with our customers has changed, right? So we would be used to manning these types of events and having a physical booth, for example. So we'd go to conferences and get together and, have breakfast all together and lunch, and, walk through exhibit halls and meet with like-minded people. Right now, we basically do a lot of these types of events virtually. And there's something interesting about that, because it allows us to interact at a global scale with like-minded people. But, I won't lie, I do miss the opportunity to get together and shake hands with, other colleagues of mine in this space. And I do hope that we get back to that. That being said, we do have a virtual booth available to you, manned by two of our team members, Albert and Jade, who are there. So I welcome you to go spend a bit of time with them when you have a little bit of a break, or you want to just step out of the main conference for a while and go take a look, go have a quick chat with them, explain to a little bit about what you're doing, and they'll tell you a little bit more about us. And it's always fun to talk with like-minded experts such as yourselves. So, the challenge of performance, right? So what are we seeing, right? Or what is generally what people are dealing with? Well, if we don't take care of the performance of our websites, you face a lot of different problems. And this is one of the reasons why, load test experts exist, right? We see slowing down of systems and websites that become unavailable. And, this ultimately can have a major impact on your brand. So some stats that are compelling, there's a lot of different statistics, but one of them that I like that when you think about it, when I look at 20, 25 years ago, and we had applications that were kind of monolithic in big organizations, we were willing to wait a much longer time than we are right now, right? So the arrival of these little things, mobile devices, cell phones, and so forth, mean that our patience around performance has slimmed. And in reality, 0.5 second, that's a half of a second delay, right? Can cause you to literally lose up to 20% of the traffic in an e-commerce type site or application. People's patience just isn't there anymore. And what that means is that, in the past, we used to optimize performance because hardware was expensive, memory was expensive, CPU was expensive. And we live now in a digital world where that reality is not necessarily the same anymore. That being said, performance remains or has came back as being extremely important because we understand that potential loss of business that's a direct relation to the experience that the customer has towards our applications. And, as much as, we put a lot of effort towards our storefronts and, the look and feel of the commerce that we operate, a physical commerce, for example, with the arrival of COVID, that digital presence becomes all the more important because that is the door into our organizations, right? So it's important to have a functional website that works well and allows people to find things, but the performance has a big play in there as well. And the other element, which is the security. So, we all know this, or most of us know this, is that unit and functional tests don't find everything. Okay, so a lot of effort is put around often testing the functionality, the core functionality of the transactions that we're putting together. And there's effort put there, and it's something that's easy, for example, for the business to understand. When you talk about the other area, the non-functional aspects of it, it's much more complex often for the business owners to understand why they need to put money in those areas. And it is important because a lot of types of bugs, such as concurrent bugs or composition bugs, they only show up under a specific amount of load or when certain things are happening at the same time. So the act of conducting performance tests, right, and emulating traffic against the target application allows us to find these types of problems before our customers find them and before they have an impact or a potential negative impact on our business. So it's important to include these types of tests in the optics of what we do. So as much as when you look at sort of the history of things where load testing was something that was kind of like, okay, well, we've done the development and we've done all of our testing and we're ready to throw this into production. Let's just run a quick load test on it. Because the performance is becoming such an important aspect of the overall experience to the customer and being recognized as such, this is where we see this trend of saying, let's not look at it purely as a load test that needs to be done as a checkbox at the end, but let's make sure that the performance of the application is something that's built in from the conceptual phase and tested out throughout that whole evolution of the put into production of that application. So as we mentioned, we've gone from simple interfaces, right? So when we look at the beginning of when load testing started, we'd have these applications, and in some cases, they didn't even have a web server. Remember doing Windows socket level load tests to target applications as well as direct database connections. So, reality is we went from these very simple sort of applications to the new reality, which is something that looks like this, right? So, and these are actual diagrams, and they're much shrunk because we have to fit them in there. But the reality of an organization like an Amazon.com or a Netflix, it's monstrous, right? The amount of interconnected servers and components and pieces that partake to giving you the experience that you have is phenomenal. And all these are now hosted within these massive environments, these cloud type server environments, right? So it's important to understand that when we look at load testing or performance testing these applications, this is the new reality. This interconnected world means that some small changes can have monumental consequences. And it's perfect timing for me to have this presentation with you guys today, because I'm sure a lot of you saw what happened yesterday where a minor change, right, a minor change in the infrastructure that was done, where it was not foreseen that it would have major consequences, took down Facebook and Instagram and Connect's applications for a total of 6 hours, and basically crippled the organization in their ability to diagnose, because even the diagnostics tools that they use internally were taken down by that. And this is what we mean by these complex systems in that new interconnected world, which means it's very critical to consider these types of tests when we're moving forward. So, how do you ensure that your customer experience is positive? Well, as I mentioned, there's 3 areas that need to be taken into account to ensure that your customers are happy and walk away satisfied by their experience of their interactions with you and your organization. The first of which most people understand is quality, right? You want a quality website. You want the prices to be correct. You want your users to be able to walk through the transaction and not have errors, right? You want them to have a good experience and not have a 404, for example, or some error that pops up saying that it didn't work. The second one is security, right? So the same way that when you have your storefront, you're going to put security cameras and you're going to ensure that you got a security alarm in place, and that you can, if you're, for example, a bank or if you're a bar or whatever that may be, you're going to have security present to be able to monitor things and take action if somebody malicious tries to get into your system. Well, guess what? The same thing applies to your online presence, right? It's important to have security. It's important to have the proper level of testing done from that security layer. And often, by the way, this is omitted. It's not the subject of this particular conference, but that being said, make sure that when you're designing the scope of what needs to be testing, security is part of it. And even more so now, because with everybody and everything going digital, those hackers are there, and ransomware attacks are on the rise. And there's a reason why it's very important to ensure that you have methodology around security patch deployment and testing of these things, because you don't want to put your customers at risk. It could have extremely negative repercussions to you if something goes public where you're responsible due to inadequate testing or deployment of patches. And then finally, performance, right? It's great to have everything working and have a super solid and secure environment. If the performance is awful and it takes 5 minutes to load a page, and things just aren't working under an expected concurrency, that's not going to work either. So when you combine these 3 elements, the quality, the security, and the performance together, that's when you have an awesome experience for your customers. So make sure that when you're building the QA plan, that you include security and performance testing, which is often known as non-functional test criteria and things that need to be validated. So what is the challenge? Well, the challenge of performance testing is that it's hard, right? It's hard often even to understand the complexity of what happens. When you explain a functional test to a business user, they get it, right? They understand that if you go to A to B to C, there's a flow and things should happen in a certain way. When you talk about performance, building up a proper performance test is complex, right? And it implies understanding layers of the application that most people don't understand. And the results of a load test are only as good as how well we've configured that load test, right? And our knowledge of the interworkings of that whole thing. So performance testers' job is a little bit more challenging, right? We need to understand what's involved as far as load balancers and network connections, and how the database connects to the app server, and which versions of these things are in place, and memory and so forth. And it also involves working with experts across all those different tiers and making sure that the load that we're throwing at the system is going to be representative of what's really going to be seen within that application. If not, the results that we get out of a load test are faulty. So the challenge of load testing is often coming up with that realistic picture that represents our reality, or our target reality, if we don't have that at the time. So the evolution of performance and towards performance engineering happens and I'm going to do this fast because I understand that we lost a bit of time, so I'm going to try to help us get to where we want to be. But the evolution towards performance engineering actually happens in different ways. The first phase that people take is they, basically go ahead and conduct a load test, right? And they'll do, some validation around that. They'll ramp up load. They'll see where things crash, and then they'll validate certain things. The second aspect of things is where you move from just load testing to performance testing, where we're actually going to do correlation around things. We're going to establish network conditions. We're going to include the validation of the client-side performance. So when we look at a lot of the new Web 2.0 applications, for example, there's a lot of things happening at the client. So it's not just the network traffic from point A to point B and back. It's what happens at that client level as well that adds some weight. We're going to start looking at these things and then producing a report and then sending it out. From there, we go to this notion of performance tuning. So it's not just about running a test. It's about giving ourselves adequate time to rerun this test a couple of times based on analytical data that we have, right? And basically ensure that we're targeting SLAs or service level agreements around transactional time and things of that nature. And finally, we're going to virtualize certain things. If our application involves, connecting to a Visa credit system or so forth, and we don't have access to those in the test world, we're going to virtualize those and add the time that those elements should take, so that when we run a load test, we ensure that we take into account as much as possible. And the last step of this is the move towards what's called performance engineering. And performance engineering, I'm sure other people within this talk are going to reference it or go towards it. It's the notion of not just doing load testing at the end of the scale of things, but it's about thinking of performance throughout the whole life cycle of things. It's about doing continuous business feedback on the reality of what's being seen in production, bringing that back into the load tests that we do so that we have an optimal view. And it's about planning, right? So for example, we're going into the Black Friday phase soon, right? So now is the time to start thinking about, doing the performance testing and validation for those things, making sure that you're ready to handle the load that's going to be hitting those systems. So when you look at this notion of the world of agility that's happening and DevOps transformation and so forth, it's important that we transform the way that we look at testing as well. Testing across those different phases of functional security and performance, in that, we're taking the real data from production, bringing it back into our test cycle, doing the analytics and building in the logic into our projections so that our load tests are as realistic as possible, and don't just look at load testing as this end of loop phase, but as something that we need to look at throughout the scope of things. So I think I've actually got us back on track. I don't know, Chris, if we have time maybe to take a question or two. But if we don't, we can always chat at the booth. As I said, we have an open booth. Chris can explain to you a little bit how to get there. But if we do have time, I'd be happy to take a question or two at this time. No questions? No comments?
I'm going to post my question so that we don't have this echo.
Okay, so I see a question over here. How have the clients reacted to these changes? Well, I mean, the reality is that the clients react to the reality of what they see. And, there's a huge impact to the business to do things in the wrong way. So when, the problem with performance testing, as long as things are going well, people often don't think about it, and they don't want to invest the funds, the time, or the efforts in the project to do it right. It's when things go wrong. It's when performance is bad. It's when, for example, you merge two systems and this new reality causes the system to crash under the performance and you lose business. And we've seen this in a lot of cases where, unfortunately, it's not that costly to include performance testing and validation and engineering, into the scope of what you're building as a project. It's much more challenging when your systems have just gone down and you're losing business, and now you need to account for it, right? So I would say the sad reality is it's up to us as test experts to help convince the business sometimes to say, look, if you take the time to do it now, it's going to cost you less and you're going to mitigate the risk. It's like an insurance, right? To do it right. And not doing it, well, if you don't have the insurance and everything goes south, then you're stuck repairing it, and that's more costly. And the impact to your business is in multiple ways. There's the direct loss of revenue. For example, if your systems go down and can't handle the amount of people that want to buy from you on a Black Friday, well, they're going to look for somewhere else to buy, right? And you're going to lose that business. So there's the direct loss. And then there's the indirect loss of next time when people think about buying, they're going to remember that negative experience. So, performance testing is all about giving yourself that insurance that you're going to avoid that problem. And I see there's another question, real life situation encounter, which could be used as an example. Okay, no company names. Well, I mean, we kind of just went into that, right? The reality is that we have encountered these scenarios. I'm using Black Friday because it's coming up, but I can just think off of the top of my head, 3 customers that came to us in a panic after they've realized that their systems went down and they were forced rebooting every hour or two just to keep their transactions going because they had issues in the back. The loss of business represented a good 30% of their yearly revenue because they lost a lot of their Black Friday business, which represented a lot, and holiday business, which represented a lot of their overall business, plus the negative impact that it had on their customer base. The year after, we were able to plan for it, do the testing ahead of time, and there were no headaches, and the CIO was happy and things went well. So I'd say that's a really good example of why it's important to think about performance in the optics of what we're delivering as applications, and making sure that there are actual stories if we're in an agile mode around that, and that we're checking those elements off, or requirements if we're in more a traditional waterfall mode of development, but make sure that performance is part of it. So yeah, very good questions. So thank you very much, everybody. It was my pleasure to spend some time with you.